There is a version of you 6 months from now who is calmer than you can currently imagine. Not because their life became easier, not because the bills stopped coming, or the difficult people disappeared, or the uncertainty finally resolved itself. That version of you exists because of 7 small decisions they made today. Decisions so quiet, so unremarkable, that almost nobody around them will notice anything has changed at all. And that is exactly why most people never become that version of themselves. They are waiting for a lightning bolt, a dramatic reinvention, a single decision so large it rewrites their whole story overnight. But the Stoics who shaped the ancient world, an emperor, a former slave, and a statesman who advised a tyrant, all agreed on something, almost embarrassingly simple. Transformation is never loud. It is boring. It is repetitive. And it is available to you starting in the next 20 minutes. If you are willing to sit with 7 habits that ask for almost nothing and deliver almost everything. Welcome to Wisdom of the Stoics, ancient wisdom for the modern mind. If you are new here, this is a place where we take philosophy that has survived 2,000 years of wars, empires, and collapse, and we translate it into something you can actually use on a Tuesday afternoon when everything feels like too much. Today we are going deep into 7 small habits that, practiced consistently, have the power to completely reshape your life within 6 months, not through willpower alone, not through motivation, which everyone knows evaporates by February, but through structure, the same structure that helped a Roman emperor survive plague, war, and betrayal without losing his mind. And that helped an enslaved man become one of the most quoted philosophers in history. Stay until the end, because habit number 7 is the one almost nobody talks about, and it is the one that ties all the others together. Let me introduce you to 3 people, Elena, James, and Marco. You will meet them throughout this video, and by the end, you will see pieces of yourself in all 3. Elena is 34. She works in finance, and on paper, her life looks enviable. A good salary, a nice apartment, a calendar full of plans. But Elena has not felt calm in years. She wakes up already tired. She scrolls before she even opens her eyes. She has tried journaling apps, meditation apps, productivity systems, and none of them stuck longer than 11 days. James is 28. He is not struggling in any visible way. He has a job, friends, a decent apartment, but he describes his life as grey. Nothing is wrong. Nothing is exciting either. He feels like he is watching his own life from slightly outside it, waiting for something to change without knowing what that something is. And Marco is 51. Marco built a business, raised 2 children, and by every external measure succeeded. But Marco carries a low hum of anxiety that never fully switches off. He describes it as a background static that has been playing since he was in his 20s, and he has simply learned to live with the noise. 3 different lives, 3 different ages, one shared problem, the sense that life is happening to them rather than through them, and over the next 6 months, all 3 of them are going to apply the same 7 habits. Not perfectly, not without setbacks, but consistently enough that their lives will look almost unrecognizable by the end. Let's begin with habit number 1. Habit 1, the morning pause. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor of Rome, wrote a private journal that he never intended anyone else to read. In it, he reminded himself, almost every single morning, of a simple truth. Today, I will meet people who are ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. This was not pessimism. It was preparation. He was not trying to predict a bad day. He was refusing to be ambushed by an ordinary one. Most people wake up and immediately surrender, their first conscious moments, to a phone screen. Within 90 seconds of opening their eyes, they have absorbed a stranger's opinion, a piece of bad news, an advertisement designed to make them feel inadequate, and a notification that makes their stomach tighten before their feet have even touched the floor. Think about that. The very first data your brain receives each day is often chosen not by you, but by an algorithm optimized to capture your attention rather than protect your peace. The The first habit is deceptively small. Before you touch your phone, take 60 seconds of stillness. Not meditation, not a ritual, not anything that requires an app or a candle or a special cushion. Just 60 seconds where you ask yourself one Stoic question: what is actually within my control today and what is not? Elena tried this on a Monday. She almost laughed at how simple it sounded. 60 seconds. She set a timer, sat on the edge of her bed, and did nothing but breathe and ask herself that single question. On day one, nothing magical happened. On day one, nothing ever does. But by week 3, something shifted. She noticed that her mornings no longer felt like she was being dragged out of bed by an invisible current of other people's urgency. She was choosing how to enter the day instead of being pulled into it. This is the core Stoic insight behind Habit 1, the dichotomy of control. Epictetus, who spent years of his life enslaved before becoming one of history's most influential teachers, built his entire philosophy around one distinction. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. Our judgments, our choices, our responses, these are ours. Other people's opinions, the traffic, the market, the weather, the past, these are not. Every single morning, before the noise begins, you get 60 seconds to remind yourself which category today's problems will fall into. That single reminder changes how you interpret everything that follows. If you are finding value in this so far, take a moment to hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear this, and it costs you nothing but a tap. Now let's move to habit number 2, because this one is going to challenge something almost everyone gets wrong about: self-improvement. Habit 2, the evening reckoning. Seneca, the Roman statesman and philosopher, described a practice he inherited from earlier thinkers: a nightly self-examination. Before sleep, he would ask himself 3 questions. What bad habit have I cured today? What fault have I resisted? In what respect am I better? Not was I perfect. Not did I achieve everything. Simply, where did I move even slightly in the right direction? James adopted this habit with skepticism. He assumed it would feel like homework, another obligation stacked on an already grey day. But he discovered something unexpected. The evening reckoning was not about judgment. It was about noticing. He began to see that most days he was not failing as dramatically as his anxious mind insisted. At 2 a.m. he had resisted snapping at a colleague. He had chosen not to buy something impulsively. He had gone for a walk instead of doom-scrolling for 2 hours. Small things, almost invisible things, but things that tracked over weeks, built into unmistakable evidence that he was in fact changing. Here is why this matters more than almost any other Stoic practice. The human mind has a well-documented bias toward remembering what went wrong and forgetting what went right. Without a deliberate practice of reflection, most people walk through their entire lives collecting evidence for the case that they are failing, while silently discarding all the evidence that they are growing. The evening reckoning is not about positivity for its own sake. It is about accuracy. It is about refusing to let a distorted, negativity-biased memory write the story of who you are. Marco resisted this habit the longest. He told himself he was too busy, too tired, that journaling was for people with more free time than he had. But when his wife suggested he try it for just 2 weeks, he finally agreed, mostly to prove it wouldn't work. By night 4, he found himself actually looking forward to it. Not because it was pleasant, but because it was honest. For the first time in years, he had a private space where nobody needed anything from him, where he could simply take stock of who he had been that day, without an audience, without performance. Notice something about habits 1 and 2. Neither requires more than a few minutes. Neither requires special equipment, expensive courses, or dramatic life changes. And yet together, they create something powerful, a container around your day, a conscious entry point in the morning and a conscious exit point at night. Most people's days have no edges at all. They simply blur into each other, one indistinguishable from the last, until months disappear without a trace. These first 2 habits give your days a shape. And once a day has shape, it becomes possible to actually direct it. Habit 3. Voluntary discomfort. Seneca, despite being one of the wealthiest men in Rome, regularly practiced something that sounds almost absurd for a man of his means. He would deliberately eat the simplest food, wear the coarsest clothing, and sleep on the hardest bed for a few days at a time. He called it a rehearsal for poverty. Not because he expected to become poor, but because he refused to let comfort make him fragile. He wanted to know with certainty that if fortune ever took everything from him, he would survive it, because he had already survived it on purpose, by choice. This is one of the most misunderstood ideas in Stoicism. People hear voluntary discomfort and imagine something extreme: cold showers at dawn, punishing fasts, deliberate suffering for its own sake. That is not the point. The point is much more practical. Modern life is engineered, almost obsessively, to eliminate discomfort. Hungry? Food arrives in minutes. Bored? Infinite entertainment in your pocket. Uncomfortable temperature? Climate control instantly. This is not a criticism of convenience. Convenience is not evil, but there is a hidden cost. When your entire life is optimized to prevent even the smallest discomfort, your capacity to tolerate discomfort atrophies, the same way a muscle weakens from disuse. And then when real discomfort arrives, because it always eventually does, you have no strength left to meet it. Elena began small. She started taking cold showers, not the full plunge everyone talks about online, but the final 30 seconds of her normal shower turned cold. She skipped a meal occasionally, not as a diet, but as a reminder that hunger is survivable, that it is not an emergency. She left her phone at home during short walks, sitting with the mild discomfort of not being reachable, not being able to check anything, not having the dopamine drip available on demand. What she discovered surprised her. The discomfort itself was never the point. The point was what happened afterward. A small, quiet confidence that had nothing to do with anyone else's validation. She had proven something to herself, in private, that no achievement at work had ever proven. She could handle being uncomfortable. And once you know you can handle discomfort, an enormous amount of anxiety about the future simply loses its grip. Most of our fear is not fear of specific events. It is fear of not being able to cope. Voluntary discomfort, practiced in small, safe doses, is direct evidence against that fear. Before we continue to habit 4, I want to ask you something, and I would genuinely love to read your answer in the comments. Which of these first 3 habits feels hardest? For you personally, the morning pause, the evening reckoning, or voluntary discomfort? Write it below. Not only does it help me understand what this community is working through, but scrolling through those comments and seeing you are not alone in the struggle is, itself, a small piece of Stoic practice, a reminder that the difficulty you feel is shared by nearly everyone watching this video right now. Habit 4. The view from above. Marcus Aurelius had a mental exercise he returned to again and again, especially during the darkest periods of his reign, years of plague that killed a significant portion of the empire's population, wars that dragged on without resolution, betrayals from people he trusted. He called it, in essence, the view from above. He would imagine himself rising higher and higher above his own situation, above his tent, above his army, above Rome itself, above the entire empire, until he could see the whole of human life as a tiny, fleeting flicker against the vastness of time. This might sound bleak at first, but Marcus did not use this exercise to feel insignificant in a depressing way. He used it to gain proportion. When you're standing inside a crisis, it fills your entire field of vision. It feels infinite, permanent, unbearable. But zoom out, even slightly, and something shifts. The argument that felt catastrophic this morning becomes, from a slightly higher vantage point, a small ripple in a much larger life. The mistake that kept you awake at 3 a.m. becomes, viewed from a year away, barely a footnote. James used this habit during a period when he had made a professional error that felt, in the moment, like it might end his career. He could not stop replaying it. So one evening, instead of spiraling further, He tried the exercise Marcus described. He imagined himself in this exact moment, from the perspective of someone standing outside, his life entirely, and imagining his city from above, then his country, then the planet turning slowly in space. All of human history compressed into a single day, his own lifetime a few seconds within that day. And this particular mistake, an almost immeasurably small point within those few seconds. He did not feel nothing afterward. The mistake still mattered. He still needed to address it, apologize where necessary, fix what could be fixed. But the crushing, all-consuming weight of it had lifted, just enough for him to think clearly again. This is the actual function of the view from above. Not escapism, not denial, but proportion. It restores your ability to see a problem at its true size, rather than the artificially enormous size that panic assigns to it. Marco began using a version of this practice whenever his business anxieties spiked. He would step outside, look up at the sky, and simply remind himself that the stars he was looking at were sending light that had traveled for years, sometimes thousands of years, to reach his eyes at that exact moment. Whatever was happening in his spreadsheet that day was real, and it mattered to his family and his employees, but it was not the entire universe. It was one variable in a life that contained far more than any single crisis. If 7 habits feels like a lot to hold in your head, don't worry. I'm going to give you a simple way to remember all of them by the end of this video. And if you want a resource like that, delivered directly, whenever we release something new, subscribing is the easiest way to make sure you don't miss it. Now, habit 5 is where things get genuinely uncomfortable for most people, because it challenges something almost everyone secretly believes about happiness. Habit 5. Negative visualization. This is, without question, the most misunderstood Stoic practice in the modern world because on the surface, it sounds like the opposite of everything self-help culture teaches. The Stoics practice deliberately imagining loss, not to become morbid or anxious, but for the opposite reason, to cure the numbness that comfort creates. Here is the problem the Stoics identified more than 2,000 years ago, long before neuroscience gave it a name. Human beings adapt to almost everything. Psychologists now call this hedonic adaptation. You get the new job and within months it feels ordinary. You get the relationship you longed for and within a year, you stop noticing the person beside you the way you did at the beginning. You get the health you prayed for after an illness, and within weeks, you're irritated about traffic again, having completely forgotten how desperately you wanted simply to be well. Negative visualization is the deliberate antidote to this numbness. For a few minutes you imagine, genuinely, specifically, what it would be like to lose something you currently have, not to spiral into fear, but to reactivate gratitude that comfort has quietly switched off. Imagine briefly a day without your health, a day without the specific person who annoys you sometimes but who you cannot actually imagine, your life without, a day without the small, unremarkable comforts you have stopped noticing entirely, running water, a roof, the ability to see, to walk, to think clearly. Elena tried this with her mother. She and her mother argued frequently. Small, repetitive arguments about nothing important, the kind that accumulate resentment through sheer repetition rather than any single dramatic betrayal. One evening, as part of her practice, Elena spent 5 minutes genuinely imagining a world in which she could no longer call her mother, not in a morbid, obsessive way, briefly, deliberately, the way Seneca and Marcus Aurelius both recommended. She imagined the silence where that phone call used to be. The next time her mother called, with the same small complaint that usually irritated her, something had shifted. The irritation was still there, faintly, but underneath it was something new, an awareness of how thin the membrane is between having someone and not having them. She found herself softer on that call than she had been in months, not because her mother had changed, because Elena's perception had. This is the entire point of negative visualization. It does not ask you to live in fear of loss. It asks you to notice, before loss forces you to notice, what is actually valuable in a life that comfort has taught you to take for granted. The Stoics understood something that modern, Psychology has since confirmed gratitude is not a passive feeling that arrives on its own. It is a skill, and like any skill, it requires deliberate practice, or it atrophies exactly like the muscle we discussed in Habit 3. Habit 6. The discipline of response. Epictetus taught something that sounds almost too simple to be profound, and yet it may be the single most liberating idea in all of Stoic philosophy. It is not events that disturb us, but our judgments about events. The event itself is neutral. It is our interpretation, added on top of the event, that produces suffering. This does not mean pain is not real, or that injustice does not matter, or that you should suppress genuine emotion. It means something more precise, that between any event and your reaction to it, there exists a gap, however small, in which you have a choice about the story you tell yourself about what just happened. Marcos struggled with this habit more than any other, because his temper had been a fixed part of his identity for as long as he could remember. He was a hot-headed guy, as he described himself, as if it were a permanent trait rather than a pattern he had simply never examined. The habit he tried to build was small and specific. Whenever he felt anger rising, he would pause for a count of 5 breaths before responding to anything. Not suppress the anger, not pretend it wasn't there. Just insert 5 breaths of space between the trigger and the reaction. The first week he forgot almost every time. Old patterns are strong, and 5 breaths is an eternity when you are used to reacting instantly. But by week 5, something had changed. An employee made a mistake that 6 months earlier would have triggered an immediate, sharp response from Marco, the kind that left people quietly resentful for days afterward. Instead, Marco caught himself, took his 5 breaths, and asked a single question before speaking. What response, right now, actually serves the outcome I want, rather than simply the feeling I'm having? He still addressed the mistake. He was not suddenly passive or permissive, but the way he addressed it changed entirely. Calm, direct, focused on solving the problem rather than discharging his own frustration. On to another person. His employee later told him months afterward that it was the moment she stopped being afraid of him and started actually respecting him. This is the discipline of response in practice. It is not about becoming emotionless. The Stoics were never advocating for suppression, despite the popular caricature. It is about reclaiming the tiny gap between stimulus and reaction that modern life, with its instant notifications and instant outrage, has almost entirely eliminated. Every time you widen that gap, even by 5 breaths, you take back a piece of authorship over your own life that you didn't previously know you had lost. We are almost at the 7th habit, the one I promised at the beginning would tie everything together. But before we get there, I want to genuinely thank you for staying this deep into the video. If Elena, James, or Marco's stories have resonated with you so far, let me know in the comments which one felt most like your own life right now. And if you haven't already, subscribing means you'll be here for the follow-up videos where we go even deeper into applying each of these habits step by step. Habit 7, Memento Mori, the awareness of mortality. Every single day, Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that he could die at any moment. Not as a morbid obsession, not as a source of anxiety, but as the ultimate clarifying tool. You could leave life right now, he wrote to himself. Let that determine what you do and say and think. This is the practice known as memento mori. Remember that you will die. It is easy to misunderstand this as dark or depressing. It is in fact the opposite. Nothing sharpens priorities faster than genuine awareness of mortality. Nothing dissolves petty grievances more efficiently. Nothing exposes more ruthlessly the difference between what actually matters in your one finite life and what is simply noise you have allowed to occupy your limited hours. Here is what makes this the habit that ties everything together. The morning pause works because your time is limited, and how you enter each day matters. Precisely because you have a finite number of days to enter. The evening reckoning works because each day, once gone, does not return, and therefore deserves honest reflection rather than being allowed to blur unexamined into the next. Voluntary discomfort works because it prepares you for the reality that nothing, health, comfort, relationships, is guaranteed to last. And building resilience now is how you meet that uncertainty without being destroyed by it. The view from above works because it places your entire finite life inside the almost incomprehensible vastness of time, restoring proportion to problems that feel infinite but are not. Negative visualization works because it reactivates gratitude for things that mortality reminds you are temporary, and the discipline of response works because every reactive moment you spend consumed by anger or resentment is a portion of your limited life you will never get back. Marco began a small quiet practice. Once a week, usually on a Sunday evening, he would ask himself a single question. If this were the final year of my life, would I spend the coming week the way I am about to spend it? Not every week produced a dramatic change. Most weeks the answer was close enough to yes. But some weeks, the honest answer was no, and those were the weeks that mattered most. Those were the weeks he called his estranged brother, instead of putting it off another month. Those were the weeks he left the office an hour early to watch his daughter's recital instead of finishing an email that could have waited. James, the youngest of the three, initially found this habit the hardest to sit with. Mortality felt distant to him, an old man's concern, not something a 28-year-old needed to think about. But he came to understand something important. Memento mori is not about predicting when you will die. It is about refusing to live as though you have unlimited time, because that assumption, more than almost anything else, is what allows people to postpone the life they actually want to live in favor of the life that simply happens to them by default. Elena's version of this habit was quieter still. She kept a single sentence, handwritten, on a small card in her desk drawer, a line adapted from Seneca. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. She did not look at it every day, but when she opened that drawer and saw it, unexpectedly, on an ordinary Tuesday, it reoriented her entire afternoon, bringing it together. 6 months after Elena, James, and Marco began, none of their lives had transformed in the way a movie montage might depict. No sudden career leap, no dramatic reinvention, no single defining moment you could point to on a calendar. What had changed was quieter and, in a strange way, more durable than any of that. Elena still worked in finance, but she no longer woke up already exhausted by a day that hadn't started yet. Her relationship with her mother had softened into something closer to genuine affection rather than obligation. She still had hard days. The habits did not make her invulnerable, but hard days no longer felt like evidence that something was wrong with her. They felt like ordinary weather, passing through a life that had, underneath the weather, become fundamentally more stable. James no longer described his life as grey, not because anything external had dramatically changed. Same job, similar friends, similar apartment, but because he had stopped watching his own life from outside it. He was, for the first time in years, actually inside it, actually present for it, actually authoring it rather than narrating it after the fact. With a kind of detached confusion, Marco's temper had not vanished. The Stoics never promised the elimination of human nature, only the disciplined management of it. But the gap between his triggers and his responses had widened permanently, and that gap had rebuilt trust with people who had spent years quietly bracing themselves around him. His employees' comments stayed with him. She had stopped being afraid and started respecting him. That single sentence, he later said, was worth more than any professional achievement of the previous decade. None of this happened because of one dramatic decision. It happened because of 7 small, repeatable, almost boring habits, practiced imperfectly, inconsistently at times, but returned to again and again over 6 months. This is the actual mechanism of Stoic transformation, and it is worth saying plainly, because our culture rarely tells you this directly. Change does not usually arrive as a lightning bolt. It arrives as a slow accumulation of small, disciplined choices, most of which are invisible to everyone except you. So here is the honest truth this video has been building toward. You do not need to adopt all 7 habits tomorrow. In fact, trying to do so almost guarantees failure within a week, the same way most New Year's resolutions collapse by February under their own unrealistic weight. Instead, pick one, just one. The morning pause is the easiest starting point for most people, because it requires nothing but 60 seconds and a willingness to sit with a single question. Before the world floods in, practice it and only it for 2 weeks. Then, once it has become close to automatic, layer in the evening reckoning, then voluntary discomfort, then the rest one at a time, each new habit resting on the foundation of the one before it. This is not a sprint. The Stoics were not interested in quick fixes because they understood something modern self-help often forgets. A life built quickly on shallow foundations collapses just as quickly under real pressure. A life built slowly, habit by habit, day by day, over months rather than days, becomes something closer to what Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca were actually describing when they wrote about virtue. Not a destination you arrive at, a practice you return to imperfectly for as long as you are alive to practice it. 6 months from now, you will arrive at that date regardless of what you do today. That part is not optional. Time moves forward whether or not you participate in shaping what fills it. The only real choice in front of you is whether the person who arrives at that 6-month mark is simply older, having drifted through the same reactive patterns, the same scattered mornings, the same unexamined evenings, or whether that person is quieter inside, harder to rattle, more present in their own life. Having built that stability one small, unremarkable habit at a time, Marcus Aurelius did not have the advantage of knowing his private journal would survive 2,000 years and reach millions of people who never met him. He wrote it for one person only, himself, in the middle of an ordinary, difficult day, trying to become slightly better than he had been the day before. That is the entire ambition behind everything covered in this video. Not perfection. Not a finished, polished version of yourself waiting somewhere in the future. Just slightly better than yesterday, repeated enough times that 6 months from now, looking back, you barely recognize the person who pressed play on this video. If this resonated with you, the most useful thing you can do right now is choose one single habit from everything we covered today and commit to it for the next 14 days. And then tell me in the comments which one you picked. I read every comment, and there is something genuinely powerful about publicly stating your intention. It is, in its own small way, another Stoic practice, because it turns a private thought into a commitment you are more likely to honor. If this video gave you value, helps this philosophy reach someone else who might need to hear it exactly today, and subscribing with the notification bell means you won't miss the next video, where we will go deeper into the specific mechanics of building habits that actually last, rather than the kind that quietly disappear by the 3rd week of January. Until next time, this has been Wisdom of the Stoics, ancient wisdom for the modern mind. Go build the version of yourself that's 6 months from now will thank you for starting today.